Okay, welcome back, everyone. So if I could just ask for everyone's attention in the room. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker for the day, who's a recent addition to our national corporate finance team, Craig Amos. So Craig has joined us as a partner, and I have the pleasure of working with him in the mid-market advisory space. Craig has over 20 years of experience in finance, strategy, M&A, and corporate development, both as an advisor and over the last 10 years as a CFO of both ASX listed and private companies. In this session, Craig will be sharing some of the many risks that he's had to take along the way and also some lessons learned. So please welcome Craig.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Pretty illustrious speakers we've had today, Olympians, chairman of Flight Centre. I'm sort of wondering why the heck am I up here today? But I'm going to do my very best. My tools will probably be a bit of humor and a bit of emotion, so we'll go through it together. Taking risks and finding new pathways. I guess what I'm going to try to cover is just 6 lessons I've had in my life. I've had a relatively diverse background. I've only been at RSM for about 4 months, so I'm not necessarily a career accountant, and I've done some relatively interesting things, I like to think. So I'll share it with you. I have a lot of images because I think we've heard a lot of speaking today, and what I'm going to have to say is probably not near as compelling as an Olympian and a chairman of a big company, but the images, no doubt, will be quite nice to see. Growing up, so I grew up in a beautiful city called Cape Town, which most of you probably have heard of. Beautiful mountains, beautiful ocean, and I had a quintessential Cape Townian upbringing. Went to the University of Cape Town, and life was relatively settled for me. But I guess, as most people know, the history of South Africa, it's quite politically turmoil. I got educated, I got married, we were very, very young. We were literally just starting our careers, and we realized we had to go somewhere new. So this was really the big first risk we took. And I don't even think they print airline tickets that look like this anymore. But the big thing you see marked off there is void. So this was a one-way ticket. And my wife and I were sitting at the airport, realizing, well, we literally had our cases and probably what was in Australian dollars at that stage, $5,000, which was a lot of money in South African rands, but probably enough to get you through 3 months in Australia. So off we came. As our family heard we were coming to Australia, they were doing their utmost best to convince us that this was not going to be a good idea. 20 odd years ago, almost about that now, it wasn't as common. And there was a lot of urban myth about what lies in Australia, which I think these pictures will probably tell you what the sort of things were getting whispered in my ears. But very, very pleased to see, I guess, the reality was completely different. And I think that's probably a lesson I've learned in life, is that reality is often not as bad as your worst fears. We fear a lot of things in life, and our anxieties can run away with us. And you know, if you read a bit of literature about anxiety and how you come through it, you actually just have to face those fears. There's actually no way to relieve anxiety other than facing it and moving right through it. And this ended up being the reality of what we face in the life we've led. So it was, for me, you know, just an amazing journey. So my first career risk. So let me just come through. Yeah. Oh, so I arrive in Australia. I'm off to my first job. First day, I arrive in the office and I say, "Good morning, Mr. McGurk." And Mr. McGurk was the partner at the accounting firm I was working at. And I said, when he looked at me as though I was crazy, and I said he'd never heard someone call him Mr. McGurk. And this was literally my first day in Australia, and I'd only then realized you don't actually call people your Mr. and Mrs. You know, for me growing up, that was quite normal. He was quite shocked by that, but I think it struck a chord for me just seeing his reaction to the fact that I actually had called him Mr. And I sort of quite quickly realized in the first few days in Australia working, how am I going to make it in a new country, in a new environment, in things that are new? And I think the thing that probably struck with me in my first few days were be humble and be polite. I thought it's pretty much something we can all be. And I think what you find with humility and politeness is that doors open. If you navigate through your life, I think my experiences has been the more humble you can be, the more polite you can be, the more doors open up. The more abrasive and obnoxious people are, doors can close. And I think this was something that I learned, and it was really triggered by that reaction to being called Mr., I guess. First, career risks. So I've taken lots of risks in my life in some ways, some worked out, some not. So I've just settled in a new country. I'm doing pretty well at Grant Thornton. I've met a few people, and all of a sudden an opportunity arises to go and join a new firm called Ernst & Young, which was a bigger firm. And so I'm torn. Do I do this? I'm an accountant, and getting to go and work at Ernst & Young sounds like a fantastic thing to do, but I've also just settled in. So I had to take a risk. And then I thought I'd made very much the wrong decision, because I arrive at Ernst & Young, and they tell me that my very first assignment is going to be at a car yard in a place called Blacktown in New South Wales, Liverpool, Blacktown. So I Googled Blacktown for those in Sydney on the webinar, and it described it as the murder capital of Australia. And then I looked at the crime statistics, and it was pretty horrific. And I thought, I've just left South Africa because of crime. I've joined Ernst & Young, and I walked in through the front door, and there were all these marble floors, and it looked magnificent. And now I'm being told I'm going to go and spend a month in the murder capital of the country. So honestly, I thought that was the worst possible decision I'd made. But I went. I did spend a month in Blacktown, and it was very, very dangerous. But I ended up making relationships that have stood me into a long period of my life. The CFO of the client was Automotive Holdings Group, and they had literally just listed. And their market capitalization at the time was, you can see there, about $160 million. This was their first major acquisition after having listed. I remember the CFO was a gentleman called Hamish Williams, who people in this room might know, ended up becoming a very well-known CFO, and remains to this day, almost 20 years on, one of my great mentors in my career. And I had the privilege of spending the month in Blacktown, but then after that, having a near 10-year journey with the business as it grew from 160 million to a 1.2, $1.3 billion entity over the course of its near life. Acquired multiple companies and grew to becoming, I guess, one of those non-mining iconic businesses that we have in WA. People often associate WA with the mining industry, but if you look over time, Automotive Holdings, when it reached its peak, was the biggest automotive group in the country. We have Wesfarmers, we have others. And I had the great privilege of working with this business as a client through that journey, through multiple transactions. And at the same time, probably got one of the best mentors that I'd ever had. So EY's going well. I got the opportunity to set up a new division in Perth. I've got a pathway to becoming a partner at a big accounting firm. So again, I'm sitting at a crossroad again. An opportunity comes to go on a long-term assignment to BHP. And for those who probably know professional services, there's probably nothing that's going to kill a partnership path much quicker than going on a big secondment somewhere else and being out of sight and out of mind of everyone for a year or two. And so I pretty much knew that. So I had this choice between stay and do what I do and become a partner of the firm, or get an opportunity to go and work on a transaction at BHP, which I had a suspicion was going to be very, very challenging, but also potentially very, very rewarding. I went to BHP. It was, I'd like to say the risk paid off. I spent 18 months there. I worked on what was probably one of the most fantastic transactional experiences you can possibly work as an advisor. We managed to sell an interest in what was the new iron ore mine at the time called the Jimblebar mine for US $1.5 billion, which was the biggest transaction that completed in the 2013 financial year in WA. The opportunity that I was given to project manage that process was unbelievable. And if you can see the iron ore chart there, absolutely privileged that we actually managed to close the transaction. That was then the top end of the iron ore price cycle. So I guess for me, in many ways, the risk paid off. So this is a bit about learning lessons as well. So my second lesson, leadership and diplomacy. The project at BHP, I was managing 80 stakeholders, and BHP is a very difficult organization to get things done. You're probably not going to find many more organizations full with as many high profile, very senior, very influential people. The advisor cohort was, top tier partners of every single professional service firm you can imagine. So there was 80 odd people. I quickly learned that I was not going to project manage this, postulating and posturing any more than any of the people I had to manage, because I would just lose that fight. And I had to figure out a way I was going to navigate 80 people to a successful transaction outcome. And I guess quiet diplomacy is the way I went about it. I ended up forming a relationship with each of the individual people doing it, understanding the role that they had to play, trying to support them in as much as I can, and trying to also resolve as many conflicts, getting approvals, getting cross function approvals by bringing people together in smaller settings and talking them out. I tried to avoid the big meetings where there would be lots of opportunities for people to put the chests out. But quiet diplomacy is a thing that has stuck with me, and I think it's a lesson that I've learned. So I finished up at BHP, successful transaction. BHP was in the process of demerging South 32. There was an opportunity for me to go and get involved in that, and that sounded fantastic. I could go back to Ernst & Young and re-pick up my partnership pathway, or I could join what was a relatively unknown little mining services company called DECMOR, because I'd been offered a corporate development manager role there. And again, as I said, not all my decisions in my life have necessarily made a lot of sense, because you look at those brands, you'd say, well, why on earth would you select the one on the end? And I did. And so I've just given up going to work on the South 32 demerger. I've just given up going back to Ernst & Young to become a partner. I go and join this mining services company that's predominantly exposed to iron ore. And that chart you see on the top left there is the same iron ore chart I showed for when I was involved in the sale of the BHP asset, that I joined a mining services business that was heavily exposed to iron ore. So clearly I didn't know about as much about iron ore as I thought I did. That's the first thing. And then secondly, I joined this business as a corporate development manager. And within 2 months, the CFO, chief development officer, the general counsel, and the head of HR all left the company. So I am sitting with a 2-year-old, a 6-month-old, and I've just joined a business where half the executives have just left. And again, I've probably made the worst possible decision you can make. I go to the CEO at the time and I said to him, who's going to run this company? He said, well, I'm going to run the company, but you're going to have to help me. So I was 37 and I stepped into the role of CFO of what was at the time an ASX 200 company with a market capitalization of just under 500 million. I had no CFO experience. Just think about that for a second. No CFO experience, 37, which would have made me, and was told to me, one of the youngest ASX 200 CFOs on the ASX. In fact, the recruiter I was speaking to said to me, I wouldn't get the job because it would make me one of the youngest ASX 200 CFOs. And I said to him, that might be the case. I had an interview with the chairman, and I had an interview with the chairman, and I had an interview with the CEO. And I said, I have no CFO experience, but what I will be able to do is give you my assurance that I'll give my every effort and ability. And I'll be honest, and I'll be truthful in the role. And I think that was enough to get me in. So youngest ASX 200 CFO. And again, it was a very, very difficult experience. Contracting, we all live in WA, mining services, it's a very, very tough industry. I learned a lot. And despite all the charts that show downward lines with iron ore and share prices and other things, I mean, the experiences that I made in the 6 or 7 years I worked there was unbelievable. I've literally got to visit all of these key pieces of infrastructure you see all around the country. I went every state, I went regional, I saw wind farms, bridges, roads, crusher conveyor stacks, fuel facilities, schools, every single piece of infrastructure. I literally got to see the infrastructure get built. I was able to get around, go to site. It was actually an amazing experience for me to have. So lesson 3, a very, very wise old man said to me, it is the person with the spade in their hand that is the most important person in the team. And I learned in contracting a very hard lesson about being present and being relevant. You don't run businesses from office towers. You don't manage teams from the stands. There's a whole bunch of things you can think about, but you really have to be on the ground, relevant, in front of people, and building relationships. And you know, I like to think I did, and I actually like to think that I made good connections with people through that process and journey. And one of them is actually sitting right here, Jason, writing down your iPad over there, Jason Hislop. So Jason worked in a business that I acquired, was involved managing, and then unfortunately had to divest as well. Jason's still talking to me, and he's here today, being successful now at Fortescue. So I guess the relationships that you make through your experiences in business, good, bad, or indifferent, you know, for me to still be on good terms with somebody in a business I had to divest under difficult circumstances, I think just keeps talking to the point that, you know, at the end of the day, I think people are what's most important. So we had a bit of a sports theme, so I guess I got to bring out my little bit of sports. My wife reckoned I had a midlife crisis. I kept telling her I'm sort of testing Maslow's theory of, you know, self-preservation and hierarchy. I've always been pretty competitive. I was turning 40, felt I had to do something new and different in my life, and got into boxing, having no background in it. And it was tough initially. I suffered concussion, which for those who've had that experience, it's pretty difficult. You literally feel nauseous for 3 days in a row. I walked around Collins Street, George Street, and St. George's Terrace with eyes looking like that for a long time. And a lot of people said to me, why are you doing it? And why don't you just quit or do something else? And for me, it was funny because people telling me to stop doing it motivated me more than actually doing it. And I guess this comes to just another lesson I had about having purpose. Got through the concussion and everything else. And in 2017, my mother died of cancer, and I sort of saw what she was going through on the journey with cancer. And it made me realize how absolutely insignificant the blue eyes and the you know, swollen cheeks were in comparison. An opportunity arose for me in 2017 to go to a national boxing competition in Caloundra in Queensland, for those that are online from Queensland. I was probably completely ill prepared to be going to a national boxing competition, but I did. And I managed to win a gold medal in the division I competed in, which you probably won't believe it was middleweight back then. I probably look like a light heavyweight now, but I managed to win. And I think talking about sports, I guess one of the things for me that stuck with me after this as well is a lot of lessons that come out of boxing. But one of the other strange things that I still have now is I can't actually walk into a pub and smell stale beer without making me think of that day. So that was at the Caloundra RSL, which was a pretty tough place to have a boxing bout against somebody from Queensland. And the smell of, I guess you all know what I'm talking about, the stale beer smell you get going to a pub. I don't really drink very much, but every single time I go into a pub, my whole blood pressure, my adrenaline literally lifts in my body. So I think many of us have heard this famous Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, stand up 8. Lesson 4, determination. Not much I can really say about that. Be determined. So then I had another experience. I'm a CFO, big public company, got to understand how capital markets work. I just think I'd just come back from the boxing in 2017. Now, 2 young lads who I'd met when I first arrived in Australia come to me and say, they want to start a business. So I go out and see them in a fairly derelict warehouse out in Balcatta. I have a bit of a chat with them. I've known them for a long time, so they're known to me. But sitting in this sort of derelict warehouse, listening to the story about wanting to start up a business that's going to be, the greatest and best next telco that's going to hit WA, was quite difficult for me to get my head around initially. Because what I was doing, I was getting caught up in looking where we were, which was just a little derelict sort of shed in the middle of Balcatta. But as soon as I could sort of switch that off and just listen to the 2 lads talk and listen to the sense of determination that they had to actually do what they were going to do, I made the decision to jump on board and help back them. Very privileged to have been part of that experience. There's a young CFO in the room here, Mark, sitting over there as well, that was part of that experience, who was an accountant that was working in a business that probably didn't look that much dissimilar to what that picture looked like, to be honest. But play that forward 4 years. We IPO'd the business on the ASX in January. It's hit a market capitalization of over 200 million. It's one of the best performing companies on the ASX in 2021. And it's the next iconic West Australian brand. It's bringing next generation technology to Perth. It's involved in a whole bunch of cutting edge technologies. I don't think in anyone's wildest dreams, within 4 years, we'd go from a small shed in Balcatta to a business that's now a demonstrable entity in Western Australia. A couple of lessons I learned from that. Resilience. Persistence and resilience only comes from being given the chance to work through difficult problems. So I think most people in this room have a business background. So I'll give you a business problem and you can tell me the solution. Startup, running out of cash, final pre-IPO capital raising that had to be done in the early parts of 2020. Around about February and March last year, we start planning. We are planning to raise $5 million through an equity capital raise pre-IPO. Without that 5 million, the company probably has enough money to go for about 2 months. And we launched the equity capital raise on the day Australia goes into the COVID lockdown. I forget the exact day in March last year. It was late March, I think. It was when the whole country went into lockdown and the share market fell 8%. Probably the worst day known to man or beast to raise its equity. But we managed to quickly flick through. We did a convertible note from believers and followers. We got through, and over the months of April, May, and June, the business boomed. Not only survived but thrived, just through the resilience. Lesson 6, last one: be nimble and be bold. I really like this quote: people who make no mistakes lack boldness and spirit of adventure. They're the brakes and the wheels of progress. And probably the example I'd give you again is a Pentanet example. So we just IPO'd, we did that successfully, and a couple of months down the line, down the pathway of that, Stephen Cornish, who's the founder, brings up the board, myself, a couple of others, wanting to participate in what was going to be the 5G spectrum auction that the Australian Communications Management Authority puts out. And for those of you that you know, these sorts of auctions, they're the domain of Telstra and Optus, and they're the domains of hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's now a public company. I'm listening to Stephen talking at 8 o'clock at night, thinking it's the craziest thing I've possibly ever heard someone say ever. I'm thinking, how on earth are you going to do this? And what do you think you're going to get out of it? And he literally said, just trust me. And so then if you actually think of it as a public company board, we had to try to get our head around how we're going to manage this. And in this day and age, we opened up a WhatsApp channel. All of our board members were able to jump onto that. And we were able to follow the bidding process all through that in real terms, real time. We didn't have to go and have a board meeting. We could keep dialogue on what was happening. And the long and the short of it is, Stephen actually managed to secure for $8.5 million 2 licenses for 5G spectrum in WA. And it's the only WA-based company that owns any 5G spectrum. So, you know, a remarkable outcome, very bold, very nimble. And even as a board, I mean, you were terrified sort of how we were going to navigate it, but we did. And that's, so next chapter, I'm here for the last 4 months. And so I suppose, you know, I'm looking forward to my time at RSM. I think for RSM, careful what you wish for, because heaven knows where we'll go from here. So thank you very much.
Jason's my name. Thanks for the reference before, Craig. I think we, through a consequence of what we went through, I probably respect you more and hadn't happened. My question to you is, why RSM?
That's a good question. I think one of the things I've learned in all my different things I've done is I really enjoy the transactional stuff. I was 21 years old when my grandfather came to me and asked me if I could sell his private company, which had been around for 50 years in South Africa, because he was retiring. So I guess it was in my DNA, love the entrepreneurial stuff, love being around transactions. You know, RSM's been in Perth and WA for 100 years. It's a firm that's very focused on the mid-market entrepreneurs, emerging companies. And I just feel that's just where I'm suited, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I guess I just have one question as well, if I may.
Go for it.
As you say, in some of your journey and some of your decisions, they might not be the logical or linear path that other people might think from a career. What do you rely on most? Gut instinct? Logical pros, cons? Like, how do you come to those decisions?
So that's a good question. That's a difficult question. I don't see myself as being illogical at all. I am quite thoughtful in what I do. But I think what I try to do is apply conventional logic, but then I do go with the guts. So I think a lot of people can talk themselves into being scared of something. So the logic sounds great, but then there's that moment of commitment where fear overrides somebody and they go the more linear path, as opposed to maybe just having a little bit of courage to go the more difficult. So I guess I try and follow a logical path, but then don't, you know, try not to be scared of taking the slightly more unconventional route.
Well, we're very glad you took the decision to join us. And thank you for sharing some of those life lessons and business lessons with us. So that comes to the end of the webinar event today. Very big thank you to all our speakers, Gary, Bronte and Craig. And yeah, we hope that you've all found those very sort of honest sharing of experiences insightful and also thought-provoking for yourselves. We will be holding this event regularly. Obviously, the Business and Finance Symposium will also be back, subject to hopefully no more lockdowns, according to Gary, hopefully. So yeah, we look forward to welcoming you to our future events. Thank you for joining us today. And yeah, take care of everyone. Thank you. Bye.